Margin is a part of box model that I have explained in the earlier lectures. Assume you have two elements that appears line by line or side by side. If you don't set any margin in between them, it will be difficult for the user to understand the difference between them. So it is better to apply the margin, because margin is the space between the elements. So it may be the space between two hyperlinks, or two paragraphs, or two div tags, or two list tags. But how much margin will you specify? It depends on your page design. So first plan your page. How much margin you want to display between the elements. Once you decided, how do you specify the margin between elements programmatically? That is by using margin property. So margin is the gap between the elements. In other words, margin is the space between border of current element and the next element. Every element can have a margin. Margin is four types: margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. When you specify the margin by using the margin property, by default, the same margin is applied for all the sides. For example, you have specified the margin as 10 pixels. The same 10 pixel margin is maintained for margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. Of course, you can specify the margin individually for each side. We will see that later in the next lecture. The default value of margin is 0. In the codes project, I would like to apply the margin for each state that are created in the states.html file. Currently, there is no margin between any state. Each div tag is internally like this. Since margin is 0 by default, there is no space between one div to another. So for the state div tag, we are going to add margin as 5 pixels, for example. We are going to add the margin as 10 pixels. You can specify any number of pixels as margin, and the same is applied for all the states because we are using the class selector, that is .state. So refresh the page. Now we can see the margin between any state. But notice there is an important point to catch here. So what do you think, how much margin is maintained between any state? So actually it should be 20 pixels, right? That means bottom margin for the first state and the top margin for the second state. So that is 10 plus 10, it should be 20 pixels, right? But actually it is rendered as 10 pixels only. Because by default browsers will automatically combine the bottom margin of first element and the top margin of second element. So the browsers will take the highest margin among the bottom margin of first element and the top margin of second element. Suppose the bottom margin of first state is 10 pixels and the top margin of second state is 7 pixels. So among these two, that is 10 and 7, 10 is highest. So overall it will maintain only 10 pixels gap between them. So this type of combining the margins happen only for bottom margin and top margin, that is vertically, but not for left margin and right margin. So if you display the states side by side, for example, this is state 1 and this is state 2, assume the state 1 has margin right as 10 pixels and state 2 has margin left as 7 pixels. In this case, margin collision will not happen. That is, the total space that is maintained between them will be 10 plus 7 equal to 17 pixels. So that's what I am saying. Margin collision happens only in case of top margin and bottom margin. That is, bottom margin of first element and top margin of second element. But will not happen in case of left margin and right margin at any cost. It may be because of to avoid the vertical scroll bar. So overall, we have understood how to apply the margin for the elements. In the next lecture, we will try to apply different margins for each individual side.